All right. So yesterday we ended up on the slide talking about redistricting and that the requirements from the census to do that every decade. We talked about the way that the different legislatures at the state level, the way the different states do it, mostly with legislatures, some with bipartisan commissions, some with independent commissions, and some states are so small they don't have to worry about it because they only have one district. Um, the process of redrawing those districts so that there are the same number of people in each one is required to preserve the quality of voting. You know, the one person, one vote, and then that works its way up through the representatives to the federal level. Um, so it's required to do that. Um, the practice of drawing those boundaries, though, is in most circumstances, a deliberate process where, uh, like in Texas, the state legislature draws the boundaries to try to benefit the majority party who's controlling the state legislature. So in Texas, that means a Republican majority is going to try to draw political district lines so that it will result in more Republicans being elected than Democrats. That's deliberate manipulation, right, to benefit one side of the political spectrum. It's called gerrymandering. That's the term for it, gerrymandering. Um, and so we're going to look a little bit at the process of gerrymandering. Um, this is a way to show you different approaches to gerrymandering, and the very different results that you can get just by drawing lines differently. So the first column here represents the 50 people that live in a district. So the idea here is that each district that we're going to draw is supposed to have 50 people in it. And the 50 people in this area, right, are split 60-40 between blue team and red team. If we were concerned that we had perfect representation in the sense that we're going to draw 5 districts here. Each district's going to have 10 people in it. And we wanted the people that were going to get elected from these districts to be proportional to the way the actual perspectives of the people in the district are. We would simply do 5 districts with 10 people from in each district. And since you've got a 60-40 split, you do 2 10-people districts with all red in them and 3 10-people districts with all blue in them. When they went to the election, you would be pretty much certain you were going to get 2 people elected with a red leaning and 3 people elected with a blue leaning in their partisanship, because you've made these districts so that they are all blue or all red districts, and everybody in the districts would be happy with their representative because they will have been picking a representative that has the same political perspective they do. Representing their district is all red, so they're in their red rep, so it's going to work, or all blue and a blue rep. However, the result of that's going to be, with this perfect representation, that when you get to voting on issues, if these 5 districts were the universe of political districts, then the majority rests with the blue team because they have 3 representatives, and the minority is on the red team. They have 2 representatives, but that's the way it splits up, right? So if you were to turn a computer loose on this, it'd probably give you something like this. If you told it, give us the best representation possible, a computer would draw the boundaries like example number 1. However, computers seldom draw the boundaries without inputs from people. And so look at what we could do. right? If we drew the 5 districts so that there were 6 blue folks in every district and 4 red folks in every district, the odds are pretty high that when you went to elect people, they would elect a blue person from every district. And you'd have 5 blue representatives, and the folks that are from the red side of things would get nobody representing them at all. See how you can just draw the lines a little different there and go from a 3-2 to a 5-0? That's a problem, right? This would be very compact in that you couldn't draw a smaller boundary, right, around a district than we did here. These are, very, very compact, all the same size, not long and strung out like the other one, but right. And compact is one of the criteria that most states want to use when they draw boundaries. They tend to want to make them compact, with the idea being people living closer to one another probably have more of the same concerns than people that live further apart. So if your district is compact, then you're maybe getting that district focused on problems that are closer to home than further away. But this is a really unfair result, right? If when 20 or 40% of the population is of one perspective, you would expect them to have some representation in the legislature, and this design would get them none. Look at column number 3. Here, right, again, we're redrawing districts, but this time it looks like, for whatever reason, despite the 60-40 split between blue and red in favor of blue, that the red team is obviously drawing the district boundaries, right? They're in the minority, but for some reason they're drawing the boundaries because they've managed to come up with a design that delivers 3 districts with 60% of the population in those districts being red, meaning they're very probably going to win those 3 districts. And then the blue team gets 2 districts, right, where they have 9 in each of those. And so the majority of representatives will be red in example number 3. Now, those districts are not compact, as we can see. They're all spaghetti-like and strung out all over the place. And they're also not fair, right? Because we wouldn't expect the minority group to have the majority representation. But the way you draw lines and boundaries, right, can deliver those kind of results. So gerrymandering, right, can be very, very important. This last election, right, we were across the country, right, not just electing presidents, but also electing folks in our state legislatures. And all of these states are going to be working with the census data in 2021 and redrawing, at least 36 of these states will be redrawing their districts from a partisan perspective. Their legislature will be doing it. And we could get any of these results out of that. Does that make sense? You may not like it, but does it make sense? How this is very important to determining how our representation is going to matter, right? So that's the manipulation that we can see happening across the states, right? And when you see right articles in the newspaper or on the TV, discussions about gerrymandering, this is what we're talking about. How we draw the lines to create political geographies that may or may not represent majoritarian kind of results. So here's the projected map from 2010 when they were doing the census, and Texas was going to pick up they thought 4 seats. We ended up picking up 3. It looks like we're going to pick up another one after this census. We'll go from 38 to 39. But you can see here, right, because we've limited the number of seats to 435, anytime the population shifts around, some states gain House of Representative seats at the federal level, and some states lose, right? And so, it should always, the pluses should always equal the minuses in this case, right? And the really interesting thing to me here, the real outlier in this chart, is Louisiana, right? It's the only state in the South that actually lost population. Does anybody remember what happened between 2000 and 2010 that would have had people migrating out of Louisiana so that they would lose, hurricanes, right? Specifically Katrina, right? And a majority of those folks that left the New Orleans area came right next door to Texas. So it's easily demonstrable that that seat that got lost in the U.S. House for Louisiana ended up becoming a U.S. House seat for Texas, right? And because that many people from Louisiana, especially, moved to Texas. Now we also had a migration of folks right into Texas from California. Notice California didn't lose anything. That's because they have as many people moving into their state as losing their state. Everybody says, "Oh, everybody's leaving California." Well, people do leave California, but people are going to California too, right? So they stayed right neutral on that. But as you can see, most of the population moved either west or south. And apparently nobody likes Ohio, right? We had a big group of people leaving Ohio. We'll see the same kind of migration happening again this time, right? From everything I've seen demographic wise, this trend is still continuing. So when we get a good map of what the 2020 projections from the census are going to be, I wouldn't expect it to be much different than this. Although I'm not sure we'll see a loss in Louisiana this time. So right now, right, we're looking at a current distribution map for the states. Now remember I said Texas was going to go to 39. This is showing the House seats. Remember there's 2 more added to every state that are Senate based off the Senate seats. Everybody gets 2. So all of these states that have a 1 by them have less than right the number to have 2. So and a lot of them have a smaller number than even 1 would get them to. So they lose a lot. Right, we've got some small ones up here in the Northeast, and then we've got 4 right here in the center of the north central area. Right, so these folks are getting probably a lot more 1 in Alaska, a lot more representation than they're due. Notice California over here with 53. Texas at 36, right? I mean, everybody else I think is less than 30, if I remember right. New York 27, Florida 27. So those are your really big states. So that's where we're at right now. I think we'll see Texas go up to 37 with our 2 Senate members. It'll put us at 39. California, I think, is still slated to be at 53, so they'll have a total of 55. So we'll see. Texas is slowly gaining right more power in the legislature, in the House, at the federal level as people keep moving here. So that's the good part about it. The bad part about it is, of course, is that it requires more money, service fees, taxes, whatever it is, to maintain Texas at the level we're accustomed to as we get more people here. Now, if they're all making good salaries and paying into it, then that's going to help us, right? But if they're not, little tougher. So this is the Texas congressional districts, House districts in Texas. This is GovTrack is a U.S. national website, right, by the federal government, and you can look up the maps, the district maps of everybody. As you can see, other states and their districts popping out, but this is Texas. You'll see that some of our districts in Texas, like Texas District 23, are huge, right, running from San Antonio almost to El Paso. And then you see the district that El Paso is in, right, a lot smaller. And what's happening here is that we're having to draw geographical boundaries to get enough people in them. So what you've got here that is Texas 23, as big as it is, has very close to the same number of people in it as Texas 16, right? So you can look at this and see the density of Texas's population, right? And in West Texas, obviously, not very dense, right? Then you come into a place like Houston, right? And you're seeing, right, multiple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different districts, right, getting a piece of the Houston area. And you start to see some of the weird designs, right? This District 2, Northeast Houston, Kingswood, Humble, right? Klein, Spring, all the way around through Jersey Village, down through, right, the west side of Houston. That is one district. Notice there's really small in some places. This is an example of some gerrymandering that's going on, right? Look at Texas District 18, right? Look at 29, right? They're drawing these district boundaries, the Texas legislature, with intent here of putting specific kinds of people into a specific district. And some of them look like that, right? So here, I was talking to you yesterday about Lloyd Doggett's district. His district is Texas 35, right? He lives here. His original district used to go out here, and it was district, right, 10, I think, and it went out here, right? And so he represented people this way. And they changed it to this way. And now, as you can see, trying to run him out of office, his district runs down the I-35 and around the southeast side of San Antonio. He keeps winning, even though the Texas Republicans keep changing his district so that they can try to put more people in there to vote him out. He still keeps winning. And then you can look at some of these districts like this, right? I mean, you've got a district that's halfway between, right? This is probably, right, San Marcos almost, right? And this district runs south all the way to the Mexican border, right? 34, same way. 28, same way. So there's a lot of people. You think the people down here have the same needs from their representative at the federal government as the people that live up here? They're in the same district. Probably not, right? Probably not. So that's a problem for good representation, right? That's a problem. But what it does is it is ensuring, right, the Republicans get as many of these districts as possible. Look at Texas District 5. You think the people out in Palestine have the same concerns as these people up here in Mesquite, right? All the way into Garland, right? The representative from here has got a lot of different ideas that he's got to be thinking about if he's going to be representing these people well. Out here, these are big, but there's a continuity, right, in the sense of what's going on in these areas, like in 19 and 13. where they'll probably have the representation, probably getting pretty good representation. But look how big 11 is, and all, I mean, from Midland, which is oil and gas, San Angelo, right, Llano, up to Stevensville, which is, nuclear power, Brownswood, which is, a lot of retirement and hunting areas. Yeah. There's a lot of different stuff going on in this district, and it's going to be hard to get good representation because of the way it's drawn. But it's going to benefit the Republican Party, so they're going to make sure that they draw it so that they can get people elected from their party there. Right, with Austin being, Travis County in particular, being more liberal, you see all of these different districts coming in and grabbing a piece of Austin, right? And then they go out into rural and conservative areas, right? Meaning there's a bunch of people right here, but if you draw the district far enough out into the rural areas, you'll get a bigger number of conservatives out here, probably Republicans, right? And I suppose it'll outnumber the Democrats in the center of Travis County area. So this is how you draw a district, right? Kind of like that one we saw when we were looking at the red-blue examples, where you can get 3 red districts out of a minority group there. So this is what Texas looks like. You're going to have a bunch of districts because you got a bunch of people, but the design of those districts is definitely political in nature. Now, this district here was ruled unconstitutional. And what was the result of that got it ruled unconstitutional was because Hispanic Republicans that lived down in this area and up in here, before they redrew this district, had a Republican representative. And remember, Lloyd Doggett, a Democrat, won this again district. So these folks, right, these Hispanics that are conservative and Republican down in this area who had someone that represented them politically, lost that person. And then because they got put in this new district with a Democrat, and then when they went and voted and he still won, now they got no representation from their party, and they felt aggrieved for that. And what they went to court, so Hispanic Republicans went to court to challenge the constitutionality of this district, wanting it to get ruled unconstitutional and forcing it to get redrawn so that they could get representation that looked like them and had the same concerns as them. And the federal court agreed with them that when the Texas legislature redrew Texas 35, they did it from a perspective based on race. And race is one of those protected areas that we learned about in civil rights that you can't use as a reason, right? It's unconstitutional to base your political decisions on race and how it's going to impact race. And Texas legislature did, and that was provable. So the federal court said Texas 35 is unconstitutional and should be redrawn, which made these folks happy, except then the Texas legislature didn't bother to getting around to it. So it's still exactly like this, and it's unconstitutional, and there it sits. Now, when the census is done and it comes out, I'm sure that the Texas legislature will change this district again. It'll move its boundaries around. So that's kind of a quick look at what the districts look like and maybe what's going on with them. You can, if you're interested in who your representatives are, you can come over here on this tab, right? Having found what district you live in, you can come here and find your representative, and it'll take you to their webpage, right? So there's Lloyd Doggett, right? And it'll show you his district here in a zoom in map over here. There it is, right? So there's this district, right? Of course, 2 senators from Texas represent the whole state, so they represent that district. And then here's the House representative representing that district. And so you can go to his official website and learn about them, right? And you can do that with all of these, right? So, if you're living here right, you can find where in the Austin, Round Rock, Cedar Park, wherever it is you live in this general area, you can find the district that map that overlays you and find out who your representative is, right? Find their number, right? 21, 31, whatever the case is, and then you can go back over here and find them right there in order here. So, and then when you do find one, right, and you want to know something about them, you can click on their district map. It'll pull that up for you. You want to see what's going on with them, they'll have their own website set up at the federal level. And you can go learn about a particular congressperson that way, where their offices are, right? So anyway, somewhere up here will be, who he is, what he's working on, obviously what party he is, right? So anyway, it's some interesting stuff. Get you back into the presentation here. There we go. Got something. Well, there's the gerrymandering. There are some rules, right? Texas does have a set of rules that they try to apply for gerrymandering. They're not going to necessarily let those get in the way of benefiting their political party. But if you were to look it up in Texas, the rules on how to draw political boundaries are, these are strong suggestions, right? And you can look these up by going to Texas legislature website. And it's, you try to have compact districts, try to follow natural and political boundaries that are already in place, which means if there are geographic boundaries like rivers or break between forest land and pasture land or something like that. Certain economies you want to try to keep together, right? Coastal economies versus oil economies versus finance economies. All of those kind of interests come into play there and are possible to be used as a way to demonstrate that. But obviously, as you can tell by looking at the shape of those districts, there's some of them that follow those, as we looked at in West Texas, and some of them, right, that certainly don't if we look at the urban areas and then how they are shared out among the rural areas. So essentially, with the legislature, the majority party in the legislature doing it, whatever they do is going to be legal unless in the state of Texas, unless it runs afoul of federal regulations. But you got to remember that the federal regulations are going to be minimal because the U.S. Constitution gives, right, the authority to the states to be able to set up how they handle the elections, both federal and state elections within their state, and part of the redistricting part of that. And therefore, the gerrymandering part of that is left up to the state as well. And so they're going to be hesitant to get involved unless there's some kind of clear distinction or designation of a constitutional problem that's going to be impacting one person, one vote. And politics is not considered protected, right? Your political persuasion may change from election to election. And so we shouldn't be trying to enforce it from the federal level. We should leave it up to or in Texas at least, we believe we ought to leave it up to the majority party of the legislature to do that. It's a political exercise, and they're the ones that we elected politically to do politics. So it's their job. Not all states think the same way, but that's kind of how we look at it, right? Um, so it's a very interesting um, process, and it requires a lot of study and a lot of time to be able to do it. Most of the redistricting in Texas, again, although it's controlled by the legislature, is done by working with computers and having the computers draw maps, and you put in what you're trying to do, the parameters you're looking for, and then because we have data on who lives where and what economics are down to city blocks and smaller zip codes and zip sub-zip codes of 4 digits on the back end of a 5 digit zip code, we can get really discrete in the way that we draw these lines from one city block or one street or to another. And so you can really dial up kind of the results that you want. If any of y'all went and looked at the redistricting game that I have out there on you'll see that it gets how particular and discrete it really is, and how exact they're trying. They have the ability to exactly draw a district boundary to put who they want where. Um, so they've got guidelines, but those guidelines don't have the force of law upon the legislature, right? They're shoulds, not musts. And so it is pretty hard. Yeah, it is because when you're moving a line, you're moving the results in two different districts at the same time, right? And maybe you need to consider 3 or 4 different districts at a time. And so to get the results you want requires you to really become an expert at it. And that's what the legislature does, right? They spend the time getting those lines exactly where they want them, which is why you get some of those really peculiar shapes in Texas. And so gerrymandering goes deep, right, into the fabric of who gets to vote where, what the makeup of a voting cohort looks like within a district. I mean, in a real sense, if you're a Republican in Texas, you're going to use the census results and the redistricting we're going to do in the next year to try to ensure that you, as an elected representative from the Republican Party in Texas, are safe from being voted out of office, right? And so now, as we can see with District 35, the results aren't always what you aim at, right? But you're certainly trying to make sure that, as a Republican, that your district has, 55 to 60% minimum of folks that tend to vote in your party living in it. And then so they might split up Hays County, right? It'll be interesting to see where we go. They're going to have to split it up some because 35 is going to probably have to get fixed, and that goes right through the middle of Hays County, and it's already got 2 or 3 different districts kind of bumping through there. So there's going to be quite a few in the central Texas area. New districts get redrawn up, and it kind of maps out the next decade's future until the next census, right? In a sense. So, is it a modern Jim Crow law? It shouldn't be, because by definition, Jim Crow law is going to be bringing racial discrimination in with it, and the federal courts have the authority to rule those districts unconstitutional if they're based on, as they did with 35, racial discrimination. But does it, in a real sense, kind of throw a projection out there of who's going to get elected from where? Probably, at least from what party? Yes. Yeah, that's exactly the point, right? You're trying to design safe districts for the majority party. You're trying to make contested districts for your political opposition. So that they have to win all of the votes that they can, right, and make it harder on them to win. Sometimes what you'll do instead, though, is you'll give your opponents safe districts, because in one sense, if you look at the map and you go, look, just the way the people that live here always vote this way. We know they're going to vote that way. There's always going to be at least one representative coming out of this area that represents them because there's so many there. So let's just draw them a district and put as many folks from that persuasion in that district. Pack them in is the terminology called packing a district, so that right they'll have as little impact as possible in other districts. The other opportunity is to crack districts open, right? To look into a district and say, you know what, if we split this district between 3 new districts, we split it up, we might can get 2 out of 3 that are from one party, and they'll lose a person or 2 or something, right? So the terms packing and cracking are what are referring to how you draw those districts and boundaries, and what the intent behind that boundary line is. Is it to split up groups of like perspectives so that they can't have a political impact, or is it to try to concentrate them so they have a bigger or lesser impact? Could go either way, right? It just depends on the circumstances that you're looking at in that particular geographical area. A lot of time and money is going to be spent to try to get the best maps possible for the majority party. And this is, in Texas right now, right, this is, of course, benefiting the Republican Party. But if you went back 35 years, they'd have been doing this to benefit the Democratic Party, right? So whatever the majority is at the time will engage in gerrymandering. This is not a Republicans are bad because Republicans do this. Political parties in the majority do this regardless of which political party it is, right? Because they're trying to look after their political future. And this is one of the tools that they have that they can work that direction. It does make change, representative change, much more difficult, right? So if you're going to overthrow in the sense of vote out a majoritarian party representative in your state, you overwhelmingly change into that election, right? And that can happen because of shifting populations during that decade between censuses. It can happen because of an influx of new population from other places, right? Not just population coming of age and dying, or and that changing the mix, but also population movement. It can happen because the parties move away from the people. So there are a lot of things that can impact whether that district is going to stay the way they draw it. But if nothing changes, then the drawings of those districts are going to result in generally, right, the desired outcome. Does this make sense? All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about how we get things done in Congress, right? So it's unfair in the sense that it's not a 50-50 shot. That's true. But when you look at, right, from the perspective of, say, a Republican, right, and they're saying, look, a majority of the people in Texas are Republican, and they voted us here to put in Republican laws and make, Republican policy, then it's fair for them because they control the majority of government, and that's what they're supposed to do, right? And designing these districts to keep Republicans in office and get more Republicans in office ensures that they'll be able to do the work that their folks elected them to do. Now, if you're a Democrat, you don't like seeing that, right? Because this is kind of baking in results a little bit. So, which means as a Democrat now, you've got to get either more people from your perspective to move here, convince people to change their minds, right? And those are, one's out of your control and the other's very difficult. So in that sense, if you're a Democrat, you're definitely looking at an uphill battle to get what you want and to get your people elected into office. So that's why you think it's unfair, right? You're working uphill, and that makes sense, right? I mean, it's a very normal feeling when you look at this and you go, wow, the structure of the way government is put together and the structure of these districts and how we elect people seems biased to one side and the other, and it is, and that's why you're making claims of unfairness, right? The rejoinder is that in Texas you're in the minority, and minority in the sense that you're the smaller political group, and you're going to lose, and that doesn't feel good, right? Okay, so bicameral. Bicameral is what we call our Congress bicameral because it's got two parts, right? A House and a Senate. And political processes have to pass in both the House and the Senate for anything to get done, right? It's not a one house parliamentary system like some countries has. It's split into two, so it's bicameral. And for law to happen, right? Usually it starts off in the House, can start in the Senate, though there's nothing that prevents that. Usually it starts in the House. It passes, a piece of legislation passes in the House. It shuffles over to the Senate. The Senate works on it. If the Senate passes the exact same piece of legislation, then it comes out of Congress with a pass, and it goes to the president who gets to decide whether they sign it or veto it or whatever. But if one of the two can't agree, then nothing can come out of there, right? Because legislation requires both the House and the Senate to come together and agree on what they want. This intentionally was built to ensure that that laws were passed less frequently than people probably wanted, required more compromise and negotiation than almost anybody wants. The design is intentionally put there to be slow and to be discursive and to limit quick change, right? Now, what that does is it means that new legislation is going to require a lot of people to get involved and to be in favor of it. And with this split design, it requires not that many people to stand up to prevent it from happening. So it's a very conservative design, right? In the sense that if it's going to bring change, it's going to require a lot more support than just 50% plus one. You're going to have to get 50% plus one twice, right? Once in the House and once in the Senate. And you're going to have to get it on exactly the same wording. So that balances or checks the powers between the House and the Senate. Now, we've been living with this for a while now, right? Where the House last 2 years has been Democrat and the Senate's Republican, and they're not agreeing on much anything. So the downside to it is that sometimes it can be too difficult to get even regular business passed. The groups can't agree on anything, and government is kind of effectively in a stalemate, and that can be bad. When we have different political parties controlling parts of government, we refer to that as a divided government. And that's what we have right now, right? We've got a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and a Democratic House. So our government is divided between the political parties, which makes it difficult to get anything done. And you'll see them, sometimes trying to negotiate and bargain and compromise. Sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. Oh, something happened here that made these slides too big all of a sudden. There we go. All right. So we're going to look at the two different elements of Congress, right? We'll look at the House first. House of Representatives is a pretty big group, 435 members in it. Requires a lot of organization, requires a lot of institutional control. There's more rules, there's more protocol, there's more strict timing on how you get things done and when things are done, because you've got to wrangle 435 people together. So there are a lot more rules that are going to be in place. There's a lot more structure in place, and so it's a much more defined kind of process. In the House, the majority party is responsible for essentially running the show. So the party that has most of the members, right, of the 435, are going to have the officers that come together. That they'll pick each other from their own party, and they'll drive business on a daily basis. Right now, the Democrats, right, have control of the House of Representatives. And so the officers, the majority party officers, are Democratic officers. And most of the rules and the decisions that are made about how to do things and when to do things are going to be dictated from the Democratic perspective. As a way of helping to organize the 435 members and how they do business, they actually have a committee that they draw up called the House Rules Committee. And the House Rules Committee is responsible for coming up with a rule that applies to each bill. That rule dictates how long the bill has for debate, who's going to talk about it, when it should come out of committee, when it needs to be on the floor. It's going to say how long it can be debated on. And if things can't be done within those strictures, those timelines, that legislation is going to die, right? Unless they come back and do something extraordinary. So the House Rules Committee's job is to try to look at each piece of legislation as it's coming up and is getting assigned to committees and say, okay, here's the timeline for this bill to come back and be, to go to committee, be discussed, be debated, be written up, be changed, and come back to the floor and be voted on. And those rules applying to every bill helps ensure that those bills move along or get out of the way, right, or die. And so, it's the way they have to organize to handle the immense amount of legislation that's being proposed and how 435 of them are going to deal with getting involved in it, right? So it's a lot going on there. On the other side, right, in the other part of the Congress is the Senate. There are only 100 folks here. Usually a bill dies in a legislative session, and it's usually not revised and resubmitted until the next session. So, which is every couple years. But if it happens at the end of a session, a bill dies, and a new session starts 3 weeks later, it could only be 3 weeks before, right? It just depends on where in the process the first bill is in relationship to the timeline for the session. And so, yeah, and the other point there is that a bill that dies in one session, nothing prevents it from being revisited, as you say, right, later. And if the leadership of the House really, really, really wants that bill, right, they can massage the process to try to keep it going. If they just can't get support, then it's dead. But if it's a timing thing, they can massage it a little bit. So leadership has some extraordinary powers to get things done that they want. On the Senate side of things, with 100 folks, that's a lot more manageable, and they think of themselves as being more important than the House members because they represent whole states, not just parts of states. So they consider their debate to be more prestigious than debate that might happen elsewhere. And so everybody's going to get more of an opportunity to be involved on the Senate side of things. There's still leadership that's provided from the majority party. They still control a lot of what can go on and how votes are taken. But the general process or perspective, I guess, of the Senate is that each senator should always be allowed to fully speak their mind. There should be unlimited amounts of debate if that's what the senators want. The way they allow this is that on the open floor, a senator can speak as long as they think is necessary, trying to convince people of their position. It takes a minimum of 60 senators to shut up another senator, right? So 6 out of 10, right? 60 out of 100, proportionally, have to be willing to stand up and say, okay, you know what? That's enough. Sit down, shut up. Most of the time, that doesn't happen for two reasons. One, they don't want that to be used against them later when they want to talk. And two, there's not usually 60 folks belonging to one party. Right? Quite often, the breakdown between the states is such that you end up with 55 to 45 or 53 to 47 or something like that. And when that happens, you don't have enough votes to stop or halt a filibuster. In other words, somebody talking forever. The idea of doing a filibuster is you're going to talk for so long that people give up and go home and a vote won't be taken. Hardly ever works, but some people have tried it. And you get some interesting things presented on the Senate floor because of this, right? I think it was Rand Paul from Kentucky that read Green Eggs and Ham from the Senate dais, right? I mean, he was just wanting to keep talking, right? Because as long as they're talking, a vote can't be held because they have the floor. However, if they need to stop and get their voice or run off to the restroom or take a phone call or something, while they're not talking, a vote could be held. So the point of a filibuster is to keep talking until everybody else gives up and goes home. But that seldom happens. What happens is you get a little bit of press for being up there for 15 hours talking about whatever it is you want to talk about. And the minute you get too tired, they take the vote anyway, and your filibuster got you some notoriety, but it didn't hardly ever gets what you want, which is there not to be a vote. You're certainly not changing people's mind. Ted Cruz, yeah, I'm sure that's true. When you're filibustering, there's no requirement that you talk about the topic. So as long as you can keep talking, we've had people reading from the Bible and the encyclopedia and newspaper. If I remember right, I watched a senator read baseball box scores one time. I mean, it's the rule is they just need to keep talking. If at any time 60 of your fellow senators want to shut you up, though, they can vote to do that. Yeah, exactly. But it's usually it's used for a point, right? It's used to say, look, what you're doing, I think, is not correct, is not fair, is not right, and I'm going to set an example, right? And then they read Green Eggs and Ham or whatever. So, but because they view themselves as a place for debate and a place for serious discussion on legislature, this kind of process is allowed. And yeah, it is like a form of protest. That's very good, Lauren. Um, and this is not even something that's considered over in the House, right? In the House, everything is you have 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes, right? And when your time's up, you're gone. Uh, yeah, I don't want to call you, right? I mean, so, but it's just a different take on what the processes are. Over in the House, the people in charge, several positions. The strongest position is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is the majority party leader, right? So currently that's Nancy Pelosi for the Democrats. And if I read the article correctly, I saw today it looks like she's going to be picked to stay the leader of the majority party and the Speaker of the House going forward for the next session. The Speaker of the House is one of the positions that's actually mentioned in the Constitution that will exist in the legislature. So it's considered a constitutional office. The majority party has an intra-party election. All right. So in this case, after this election, there are more Democrats again than Republicans in the House. So the Democrats get together and they vote amongst themselves about who their leader is going to be, who the Speaker of the House is going to be. And so last time they picked Nancy Pelosi. This time it looks like she's got enough people pledging support to her that she thinks she's going to win again. And so that person will be in charge of leading all of the House, right? There will be minority leaders and minority whips and right that come into play of this, representing the minority party, but the day-to-day business we run on the perspective of the Speaker of the House and their leadership that comes out of that majority party. Some of the important things that they do besides just lead the majority party is they're mostly responsible for assigning House members to the committees they're going to work on. That means both Democratic and House Republican members. So you don't want to, right, as a Republican, get off on the wrong foot with Nancy Pelosi. You end up on a committee with an assignment you don't like. So you got to at least be cordial there, right? I mean, obviously there's a different political perspectives, and that's expected. But you've got right your political career in some sense is dependent upon how the Speaker of the House assigns work to you. As bills are presented and come up through the process, the speakers of the House, their office is responsible for shuttling those bills off to the appropriate committees. So they decide, generally speaking, where the bills are going to be heard. The heads of those committees are going to be people picked by the Speaker of the House to run those committees. So in a real sense, right, if Nancy Pelosi sees a bill that's been proposed come up and she likes it, then she can make sure that she tells people that and that she expects to see it make it to the floor, and they should run their committee to try to ensure that. And conversely, if she sees something that she doesn't like, then she's telling those committee members, I don't want to see this anymore. Make sure it dies in committee. Don't bring it up. So the politics that goes on there between the leadership of the House determines a lot of the legislation that's allowed to come forward. Now, you have to be careful in doing that. You don't want to always just tell any piece of Republican submitted legislation. You don't want to tell your committees, kill it. I don't want to see it, right? Don't ever. You've got to let, in some sense, the minority party have um, a realistic, right, opportunity to bring forward and discuss issues. And then, right, as a majority party, you decide what's going to happen with it. If she is indeed picked again to be the Speaker of the House, she will then pick party members, right, to be majoritarian leaders to help her run the House and to help ensure that her party is behind her as she's moving forward. So there'll be some majority leaders picked. There'll be some majority whips picked, and their job is to go out and make sure that the support for legislation that the speaker wants is there to whip that support up. On the other side, the minority party is going to be doing the same thing, right? They're going to be putting people out there in the House to try to make sure they present the best case for their constituents or for what they want. And so you've got a Speaker of the House who's the majority leader, you got a minority party leader, right? And they'll be facing off in a sense with one another. On the Senate side of things, it's kind of the same way. The day-to-day business of the Senate is run by the Senate Majority Leader. That is, generally speaking, the most important position in the Senate. Constitutionally, there is an office referred to as the President of the Senate. That office is filled by the Vice President of the United States. So Kamala Harris is going to be the President of the Senate. Most of the time, that is a formal designation only. The President of the Senate only comes into the Senate to do a couple of major issues. If there's a tie, 50-50, 49-49 if you're missing a couple votes, right? The President of the Senate can break the tie. If you're going to have an impeachment trial in the Senate, the President of the Senate administers those trials. So they're in charge of setting them up and getting everybody in place and deciding when and where, right? The administration part of it. The actual trial will be managed on a day-to-day basis in the Senate by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But the President of the Senate will be responsible for administering it. So going forward, that's going to be Kamala Harris. Now, unless right now, what we know, let me back up. What we know about the Senate is that the Republicans look to have 50 seats in the Senate. The Democrats look to have 48 seats in the Senate. And there are two senatorial elections, both in Georgia, that are going to runoffs, which will be decided early January, I think the 5th or something of January. If those two seats are decided, or one of those seats is decided for the Republicans, then the Republican Party will have the majority and they will control most of what's going on in the Senate. If both of those seats, though, fall to the Democratic side of the election, you will have 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. Actually, you'll have 50 Republicans, 49 Democrats, and an American Socialist, which is Bernie Sanders. So who will vote Democrat? So you'll be split 50-50, which means Kamala Harris might have to be on call a little more often if there's a tie in the Senate. That's not likely to happen. That Georgia's going to flip both of them. It's possible, but I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it. And so likely what we're seeing going forward in January is that the Senate Majority Leader will be the same Senate Majority Leader we have now, which is Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky. The Senate Majority Leader has a lot of the same powers and responsibilities as the Speaker of the House does, right? They schedule bills to come to the floor. They influence committee assignments, not to the same extent as the Speaker of the House, because the Senate as an organization pays attention to seniority quite often. And sometimes seniority is more important than what party you belong to as to where you're going to be assigned and what work you're going to get. So in that sense, the speaker, the Senate Majority Leader is not quite as strong in the Senate as the Speaker of the House is in the House. But they're strong enough. All right, if you've been watching things, you understand that Mitch McConnell's got a pretty good control over what's going through the Senate and controlling what comes up for debate and what doesn't. Okay, any questions about the leadership? Right, we're not going deep into it, but I do want you to understand Speaker of the House and their roles, Senate Majority Leader and their roles, what the whips do. Right, not a lot, but some. So let's talk then a little bit about who has the most power. Is it equally divided three ways? So it looks like you're asking me this in relation to House, Senate, and presidency, or Congress, presidency, and the courts, right? Because constitutionally, our government's broken up into three parts, and that's the Congress, the presidency, and the courts, right? And Congress's job is to make legislation and oversee the business of government. President's job is to lead the country and implement legislation, right, from the Congress, and then the court's job is to interpret the constitutionality of actions and legislations as the government moves through its business. And in that sense, I'm going to have to take the position that it depends, right? Because if you have a Congress split between two parties, then the power really comes from the part of Congress that has the same party identification as the president, right? So in this case, if we assume going forward, right, that nothing's going to change, the House is going to be Democrat, the presidency is going to be Democrat, and the Senate's going to be Republican. Most of the time, the court's not going to be involved on a day-to-day basis, so you don't have to worry about that most of the time. But for legislation to get to the president, it's got to pass through the Senate. And the odds of the House putting together legislation the Senate's going to agree with is pretty slim. But the presidency, right, belongs right to the Democrats. So there might be a lot of presidential power that's going to be exercised, whether they have a clear line of authority to do that, because Congress isn't going to be able to stop them, right? Because they're divided between the two parties. And so that will accentuate the power of the executive branch because Congress is split between two parties. Much like right now, right? Trump has been able, right, as a Republican, to do a lot of things that he wants to do. Congress hasn't been able to provide oversight and to stop him because it's split between the House on the Democrats, so it's going to stay that way, it looks like. So in that sense, right now, with a divided Congress, I would give a little more power to the executive branch, to the use of executive powers and that kind of thing. If you're looking at it in just a legislative process, the minority party, or not the minority party, the minority element of the process when you're looking at House, Senate, and presidency has the power because they're the spoiler. So in this sense, right, we'll see more of what we saw for the last 2 years, and that's Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party playing spoiler to what the Democratic Party out of the House wants to get done, right? Because whatever the Democrats want to do, the Republicans probably don't. So in that sense, the relationship power is that McConnell's going to have the veto, essentially, over what the House is trying to do. That forces the House to either negotiate and give up something to get something, or ask for less than they really want, or get nothing done. Like I said, divided government is usually not a recipe for quick, effectual oversight and control of the government. Right? It's going to be slow process.